All these kids know how to, it's the age-old thing, they know how to manipulate parents. Today you don't hear the kids playing around in the mosque anymore. You know what happens? They won't come.
Fiercely Muslim, as they are fiercely Pakistani.
Actions didn't stop because of any natural ethical soul searching that happened within races to say, let's stop it happening. Our elders went out there and gave them a good hiding back. Identity is what we were. I think identity is what we are. Yeah. We say toxic masculinity, well, by that very nature, there has to be by default a positive masculinity then.
This within me gets quite angry, and I think, look, why are you so afraid to talk about these things? Why do they not cross your mind?
If we don't create the basics, we can't create the overall beauty of our community.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum to everybody, and assalamu alaikum in particular to our guests today at the Karima Foundation podcast. So,
my name is Bilal. I'm 27. I work as a pharmacist, and I've been joining Moose again on the Karima Fireside Chat podcast.
Fireside Chat. And then we're also introducing our special guest today, who I was going to call PC Raja, but he's not a PC anymore. I'm sure a number of people from High Wycombe will recognise Mr. Raja. How are you, sir? And now you're a sergeant.
Yeah.
Explain to us what that means.
It's a supervisory role of a PC. So I used to be a constable when I used to work here, but now I'm a sergeant with supervisory or bigger responsibility.
And now you're based in?
Magna custody. So I work within criminal justice. So responsible for prisoners and administration of justice and cool topics like that at the moment.
Inshallah. Okay, so many different topics to discuss. I think I'm really excited about just trying to pick your brains. And again, I think we've known each other now. It's going back
14,
15 odd years now. Okay, so it's a long time. And we've had lots of conversations in those years. But actually, I think what I really wanted just to get from you a couple of different things. First of all, I suppose it's a really, really important question. So why are you a police officer? Like this is the thing about, and again, one of the things we really wanted to talk about was identity.
Yeah.
Britishness, what it means to be British, Pakistani, British Asian, British Muslim. What are we? Are we Pakistani? And all those kind of things. And I think there's a lot of that which is almost it's anti-authority, and especially anti-establishment police. So you sold out by becoming a police officer, man.
Totally. It's an interesting one. My police journey never started for the reasons that became the reasons why I stayed. So I'll be really honest. I joined the police only to have a laugh, because I used to work in my dad's cab business, and when I was going to buy a house, I needed a job that I could show I'm getting decent earnings, get a mortgage, basic stuff. But I joined up because my dad originally envisaged me joining the army, and he wanted me to, and then he wanted me to sort of join in through a medical field, and I didn't quite go there for a host of life reasons. But what happened was I ended up joining the police as a kind of way to keep him happy. It sounded quite interesting. And it hit three major sort of areas for me that I thought a job's got to be interesting, recession-proof, because I'm showing my years now. There's been a few recessions at that stage that we're looking at. And aside from even those two things, it had to be something that kind of appealed to my own sense of self. I don't want to say self-worth, but something that I felt I could contribute to, and it would contribute something to me. So I've never been averse to conflict or dealing with difficult people. But I joined it for the very basic reasons. I literally planned to give it up in about 8-9 months. But I went through training. I went on area. I hated it. And I started off in Slough. I really hated it. The kit was too heavy. There were too many people telling me what to do. I'm really anti-authority myself.
I was going to say, Slough,
Oh yeah,
It's quite an interesting place to start.
Well, don't forget, this is Slough in the early 2000s, where there was a very big Salafi movement. I loathe to even call them Salafi because these were pretty hardline. Even the local Salafis called them Wahhabis.
Right.
So these guys were it got to a point where they were dishing out. I had a dude hand me a fatwa during a town centre patrol. Because I was based on a town centre unit. We did 2 months here, 2 months here in different departments when you were new. So I found it really, I hated it. And this dude handed me a fatwa and it really knocked me for six, thinking, God, this is weird.
What's the fatwa? Just usually, please.
You are upholding kuffar law.
Right.
Therefore, you are officially to us a kuffar, but you're still salvageable. It was a very poorly written one. And it came from some dude's sheikh. I didn't even know his name. I'd never heard of the fellow. None of the local masjids did, because I rampaged to all the local masjids with my uncles in Slough and said, who the hell is this idiot? What kind of fatwa is he throwing? Like, I'm not walking around as Harlem, but I don't think that's appropriate. I'm nowhere near Harlem, as I say, but I was fairly well read enough that I knew what he was talking was nonsense. You can't apply that kind of takfiri, ijtihad, and very basic flawed logic. But then I started working on a local community project at the ACC at the time. He was an area commander.
ACC is...
At that time, he became assistant chief constable later, but he was the area chief superintendent, and he was like the BCU commander, so he covered a big area of Berkshire. Amazing man. I'm still in contact with him to this day, called Brian Langston. He put me on a community project where there was I don't know if you guys remember, but in 2004, there was a terror plot involving some lads in Manchester and Slough. Okay. So there were some arrests made. So we were part of the serial that went into the area to deal with community sort of unrest.
Yeah.
And up to that point, I was never crewed with an up and on before. And it was a whole different world. I just saw a completely different side to policing. And the funny thing is, the night before I gave my resignation, I had it written. And I had enough. I literally told my family, it's done. I'm good. I'm going back to...
Was that just because you got tired of it, or just...
I thought, this is some other dad's problem. I can't be bothered with this.
Yeah.
But I did that community project and something changed. So we were coming across situations I was directly able to get involved in and sort out. We were literally hearing people's problems, but you were offering some solutions to it as well. And the more we engaged with people, I got to see a different side of the job. The problem with shift policing is you are very one-dimensional. So, for example, you probably heard of policing. After Stephen Lawrence inquiry, policing had admitted it's institutionally racist. Which
that was a Met in particular.
So it started off with, I think it was GMP originally said it, and the Met, they wanted the Met to say it. Okay. Most forces started resisting it, and eventually the Met had to concede. But as all policing had to.
Can I just ask you on that point?
Yeah.
How was it admitted? What was the evidence that the police as an institution is racist?
So, it's an interesting one.
Was it like in America, as they're saying, it's kind of open knowledge that a lot of the KKK, etc., far-right groups infiltrated the police force, and that's what's police unions, and that is what is leading to their problems. Yeah. But is that something similar that you saw in the UK? Or?
Well, someone just in the paper the other day, actually, there was a Met officer who he passed recruitment and everything, kept his views to himself, and he was actually affiliated to a prescribed far-right group of extremists. We're talking very hard line. And some corners, they even called him a terrorist in that respect. His views started to become known. There were things being put up inside the station, far-right symbols, and he was caught. And then the job dealt him out. There's been people I've known in my job who've been dismissed for racism. I've always had a particular view on racism in the police. I've never been afraid of... do you remember what the documentary from the BBC had come out in 2003 where there was an undercover policeman?
By the way, I think I just like to point out that I'm quite younger than these gentlemen. When they're talking about 2003, I was about 12, 13 years old then, so I wasn't really that clued or woke at that point. But yeah,
I'm still not woke now, but anyway.
So it was.
But yeah, the BBC documentary.
Yeah, so he was a journalist that went undercover into police training, and he recorded undercover police officers through recruitment up to his tutor, or literally being racist. And that was huge, and that came out while I was in training. So policing's had a very weird relationship with racism, even internally. So you've got the bosses that want to do something about it genuinely, because there's no pro being racist, there's no benefit to the force being racist. It's not something that they can show off about in front of government, in front of communities. Communities are a lot more influential and powerful, have a greater say in policing. They don't want to look embarrassed in front of them. They genuinely, even we have a code of ethics, they don't want to let the community down as well. But at the same time, there's another side, which is the pink and fluffy world of our sort of aspirations, and then the hard reality. And the hard reality that policing can't escape from is if you are seeing a group of people in one light constantly, and because of your background, because of who you are, your class, your racial profile, your geographic profile as well. A lot of police officers come from essentially all over the country, where generally our people, Asian people, as for example, we tend to live in areas where there's other Asians, right? And we can talk about white flight from those areas being one of the reasons. It's not just because we move into those areas. Yeah. But none of these people have, on the whole, not all of those people, the white officers, had that kind of one-to-one close friendship, working relationship with someone from a different community. So if all they're seeing from that one community is negative, it naturally, your mind being what it is, has to rationalize everything. And if one thing keeps showing itself in one way, it's very easy to start associating that thing with those people. And that's not
like an unconscious bias type thing.
Well, I would argue it goes a little bit more than that in today's climate, because we've almost got an empowering of the people that previously couldn't say the things they probably wanted to do but weren't sure. We've almost got a counter narrative to what some people call liberalism, for example. You know, all communities, all people are equal. I don't think that's a liberal value personally at all. I don't. But we've got a different metric, which is there's too much political correctness. That term in itself, by the way, is a far-right pejorative. People like us didn't create that. People who wanted to be racist or be whatever it is wanted to say things they could no longer say. So the pejorative came from them to almost reduct the virtue, or as a controversial figure in our community, Barack Obama once said, the progress that we made in civility in all these recent decades. This term undermines all of those to say, no, forget that progress. I still want to call a Pakistani man, an Asian man, the B word, or a black man, the N word, or women, blah, 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 have their place. So the relationship within policing to that is that there's something Robert Peel, who established the modern police force, the actual police force, once said that we are the people. So essentially, police officers come from the people. We reflect them, we're from them, we are them. They are us, we are them.
So I was going to ask about that actually. So in terms of modern, the McPherson report, which was on the back of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and all those kind of things. So the McPherson report pretty much said, I recall it being a lot about the Met Police, to be honest, but I don't, maybe it's other forces as well. But a lot of it was about, which obviously causes its own issues, that actually policing needed to be people from communities, Black and Asian, BME, for want of a better phrase.
Bain has come up.
Yeah, exactly. So Bain, so more people from those communities. So how do you, and then so I suppose this goes back to another question about how do you then find, is there an increase in Pakistani police officers, Muslim police officers? I know there's like the Muslim Police Association. And I know recently in the Thames Valley, I was doing something through work actually, and I kind of always joke about some of these posters or some of the pictures they have. They have the rainbow people. So they've got the black person, they've got the Muslim woman with the hijab. They've got the person who's LGBTQ quite clearly, and all those kind of things. But I thought it was quite interesting actually. There were a lot of Muslim people on that particular post, and that was Thames Valley.
Yeah.
So has it been, I mean, you've been on the force now for
17 years
17
in
odd
3
years.
days.
Okay.
Alhamdulillah.
nearly 2 decades, right? So in that time, how have you seen the number of Pakistani Muslim people increase?
Yeah.
And has it played a positive role, or has it been actually a bit more of a challenge?
So the numbers gone up and down, but the numbers of police officers has come down up until the recent uptake you've heard. So there was a lot of, I saw it as a bit of a distortion of figures being presented in some respects, not just by police as institutions, but government statistics saying, well, if you look at the percentage of policing, look at the cold hard numbers, going by facts. So sometimes what policing does to try and be recession proof, for example, is we tend to have lots of people that retire at the end of their 30 years standard service, for example. While the predominant numbers from 30 years ago were white officers, when they leave, then the existing numbers, the percentages of non-white officers naturally becomes bigger. The fraction now is bigger.
Yeah.
Our force has really struggled, actually, and I say our force, actually policing in general. If you consider, these are approximations, half of the country's police force, representation of black and Asian minority ethnic, everybody who's non-white, is solely represented in the Met. Approximately
again,
half,
for want of a better phrase, BAME are in.
Yeah, is all in the Met.
Met.
Now, there was a College of Policing, which is like a...
I mean, I wonder, is that reflective of the country as well? I mean, I appreciate, some larger, Manchester, Birmingham, Bradford, etc., but...
And those numbers, again, are quite high, better represented. Representations there, but the Met is a huge force, biggest in the country, so they will have a bigger percentage.
And also, in terms of what the area the Met covers, is a large...
It's nowhere near where it needs to be, by the way, but there's better representation there.
Is that a good thing, though?
Yeah. I think communities need to represent... Police forces need to represent the communities they police. And there's a host of reasons for that. Not just because the Asian guy can speak the Asian lingo and
understand the culture.
And understand the culture.
References. I mean, that's when you talk about those community projects.
Yeah. Now, the law is still the law. You won't be let off because this happens in your culture. It's nothing like that. And policing is very careful to draw a distinction in there.
As it should, yeah.
As it should. Which is why I always find it really problematic when people say things like, the Rotherham cases with the girls, with the grooming thing. Yeah. The police were afraid to upset people because they didn't want to be called racist.
Yeah, the 3 girls statement that came out.
I'll put my badge on the line and say I don't agree with that statement. Because if you look at the makeup of people arrested in those areas, they're still BAME. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I didn't buy that then. I don't buy it now. But there is a standard of policing that I'm very critical of the standard I want for my community. And I don't think dropping standards is the right way to go. And I get that from my family. I get that from my mentor at the time, Brian Langston, because there was a big debate back in over 15, 16, 17 years ago to recruit more people from our communities. And I remember there was a standoff between him at the time and the now infamous Ali Desai, who he said get the quantity of heads in, whereas Brian Langston's position was he's from a BAME background, and he said no, it's the quality of heads because they make more of a difference. They are more what we call today change agents. You could bring people in who are worth their mettle, who could make the change. So rather than having, canning a number of people in and saying, look, we've ticked the box, that is no good to us. And I've seen examples of that. And those people will either end up being dismissed or they will leave because it's not quite what they thought. So when I would do recruitment, alhamdulillah, the people I've recruited over the years, funny enough, were in the job as well. When I used to meet them, I never sold the job. I sold the worst end of the job. You're going to be staying on long hours, you'll be dealing with everybody, everyone will hate you, your community will see you with suspicion, policing has a nickname, divorce force and things like that, because you work strange hours, it'll affect your health, depending on how you take care of it. But these are the rewards, and then I'd go into that. So they came in with their full eyes open. And I don't agree with this. Let's show everybody the positives and the pros, get them through the door. No, this is an institution, it's not a career. I don't believe it's a career, I still don't call it a career. I'll say it conventionally, but it's not. It's an institution. And if you don't see justice as the forefront of what you need to endeavour for, this is not the job for you.
And I just wanted to ask you, what do you actually think the role of the police is? Because I was reading something by James Baldwin a couple of days ago, and he said the police's role is not to enforce the law, but to protect property.
That's interesting. The other person to have said that in the UK was John Woodcock, who was the chief inspector of Her Majesty's Inspectorate, which is like policing the police. They come and initiate policing reforms and things where they think policing is going the wrong way. They will come in. He was a man of extraordinary experience. He was a chief constable. He worked in the Northern Forces. Everything I've read about him, from what I've seen, is quite positive. He was very critical of policing in his time as well. And he once made a statement that Akala once quoted in his book Natives, which was, the problems we're seeing today with policing is because we are bringing and his quote was something else in terms of the age, a very old institution, primarily there to protect the property of elite people from what they called the dangerous classes. It's to protect property from there. We're bringing it effectively in 21st century. So Akala took it slightly differently, and although I've got a lot of respect for the brother, I think his slant was incorrect because I can see from this side of the fence. He said, for example, don't believe when the police say don't believe what they say, that they're trying to be pink, fluffy, great, protect you, do this and that, and they do the odd good thing, finding a missing child, arrest a murderer and this stuff. The endeavour is to protect people's property. That is very outdated because the modern reality is we do have crimes that are reported by people from what they called originally the dangerous classes that the elite were worried about in this country. We arrest anybody for anybody. We, for example, you can see in the way that things have been handled from terrorism all the way to celebrities, people close to government were, I don't know if you remember the Cameron election time, the News of the World scandal, people close to government. Policing was all over that, all over it. Arguably, there was political connotations for that for policing as well. But the policing that we see today, I can't say that previous logic for then is now true.
Okay.
It also works two ways as well. The Magna Carta originally for this country, for example, was never meant for the common man, even though it reads so. Right? It reads as a very egalitarian protection of rights, constitutionally protects rights. Actually, it came from the barons, knights and lords who basically wanted the king to stop screwing them around for their taxes and their property. That was it. But it became a different beast later. We developed a parliamentary constitutional system. We have a constitutional monarchy. Anybody can be an MP and be representative. Anyone could go to the House of Lords and become Prime Minister. I have to remind people quite often that it is a House of Commons, House of Commoners. They're not aristocrats like the Lords, which is an institution a lot of people don't really focus and realise. We still
we
have
can have another
system.
conversation about that, whether they're commoners or whether they're or whether they're Oxbridge elite. But
and I meant that tongue in cheek, by the way, just to clarify.
But just as so again, we can have that conversation continuously, I suppose, around policing, the challenges around policing, and I think one of the things I did want to get onto actually was actually how grateful and I think how thankful we should be with regards to policing, especially now. We've seen some of the situation in America, this whole defund the police and all that kind of stuff, and I think it's a very, very it's going to be a very, very difficult road, and I can't see those, and I wouldn't like to be there basically, but. If I could just ask, so going back then, one of the things I really did want to talk to you about was some of the challenges around policing, and in particular for our community. So obviously the podcast is primarily for the British Muslim to try to understand and just have those conversations about what the challenge is. Why is it that so many of our young people are in prison, are going to prison? What is it? Yeah. What are the challenges around? That you're seeing on the streets, maybe before some of those people end up in prison? And again, I think we can probably we can agree that it's most likely going to be the boys that are going to have those challenges and those problems. Yeah. And also, I think in terms of the proliferation of Pakistani boys, Muslim boys in prison has increased massively over the last year. And again, I should probably have got the figures, but I don't know if you... It
doesn't surprise me. There's it's a componential. Have you seen those plasticines that have loads of different colours in there?
Yeah.
When it's jumbled up.
Yeah.
That's what this situation is. There's two main ways we could look at this. Religiously, what the connotation is. When I say religiously, as in the Muslim angle, and then there's I hate the word cultural, because we actually have so many multiple different cultures.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem. It's
massive range.
And there's a huge, a Somali brothers culture,
yes.
completely Somali brothers. You could even about Pakistanis, Punjabi, Puthari, Mirpuri. Some of Peshawar is not quite Pashtun enough for the Afghans, but not quite Pakistani enough for some African Muslims. We've got Iraqi Muslims here, Kurdish Muslims. We have so many. So we also have an ethnic side which we could look at. For example, let's take Pakistani, because I find Pakistanis are a huge melting pot example of what we can probably, to a lesser and greater extent, apply to many other different cultures of Muslims around the world, especially from the ethnic side and also from their history, from where they were to what they are, why they came, and where they're going. We have to look at it first and primarily. There is something in our people right now, in my thinking right now, that has completely missed the mark. And to me, we're in a transitional period of not make or break, but make or lose out on, and let the wheel carry on going in a distance and in a direction our elders never intended. And I'll explain. Our ancestors did not come into this country as Muslims. They didn't come in this country for Islam. Yes, they were Muslim. They came here, but they didn't come here for scholastic studies under Dr. Abdullah Quilliam.
Yeah.
They didn't come here to turn around and establish masjids where they can do dawah projects non-stop, establish langar projects for the poor that they met here. They didn't come here to turn around and spread the virtue that, for example, Wali Songal had done in Java, for example.
They were Tabliki, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they didn't do anything.
That's like a Tabliki type. 40 days, right? We're going to go to Britain.
Every place.
We're going to go to
every corner.
We're going to go to the East End.
No abuse is bad enough for us.
Right.
It all. They didn't come for that. Frankly, they did not come for that. They came for financial reasons. And we could look at the reasons why as very noble reasons. They came from... it's quite open. We're in work times now. There's a lot of information out there. Our subcontinent at the time was absolutely ravaged financially. There was nothing left. From one of the richest economy in the world, the Mughal emperor was richer than the Ottoman emperor. Now that's something to consider. At one stage, actually had more Muslims under him as a ruler than the Ottomans did. And they ruled pretty much primarily Islamic lands. But that gives you an idea of the sheer numbers.
Yeah.
Now, bearing that in mind, after various different sort of European excursions into the areas of what happened with colonialism, the Persians I don't give generally the Persian previous kings a get out of jail free card on this, by the way, because they didn't exactly come in for fun either. But there is something there that had totally financially ravaged an economy that was the biggest economy in the world to literally near nothing. So they came from families where they were highly depended on by multiple different tens of people in some cases. Land was completely lost. My own clan had lost land, had come into a different area, took over someone else's land and said, right, we're going to establish our own rule here. There are other uncles of mine from their different sort of areas. Because of how proud they were from their lineage, they wouldn't work the fields to feed their families. They would eat leaves off trees, not to drop their heads. That to me today, as an egalitarian Englishman in a way that I've been raised as an Asian, I see that as silly. I would swear to God I would clean those streets if it came to feeding my family. But in those days, the culture, the oath for those people was not to do that. They didn't want to lose that. So when the opportunity came from England to say, fight our wars, they jumped. They literally jumped. So they, for example, supported the British during the wars in World War I, World War II. And we could discuss how far they supported, but the fact is they joined in huge numbers. When, after World War II, when obviously the Germans had been and gone through here and done what they did to rebuild the country, they saw the opportunity, they came.
And it was a volunteer army as well.
They were never forced. They were never forced.
And so I think that was a really interesting point as well, because I think my understanding it was the largest volunteer, like 500,000
More than that.
People basically.
You're talking over eight.
Across.
You're talking just under 900,000.
Okay.
And in varying numbers. And of that, it's an interesting one because the people that joined from families that were primarily warriors. So the British were incredibly racist. I've got some of the books are comedic because I've got books over 100 years old at home where they had manuals dedicated to which tribes to choose soldiers for, because the British essentially the British Imperial Army felt that they were exclusive. Out of all the Europeans, they're exclusive. It would make the Nazi think, man, I'm not harsh enough. So they wanted their soldiers to be exclusive. So they didn't just want Indians in their army, they wanted the most elite warriors with reputations in there. So they established certain regiments within them. So there was, for example, Muslims, although they were more egalitarian than the Hindu sort of systems, like, for example, there was a Hindu Rajput regiment, Hindu Jat, there was a Sikh Jat regiment as well. Very valiant people, not going to take anything away from them at all. The Muslims never had such a regiment. They had a Punjabi Musliman regiment. And it's literally called that, the Punjabi Muslimans. That regiment had people from every type of known landowning warrior tribes that were people who offered their services with not much encouragement required, in fairness, to effectively overthrow the next campaign where they wanted to go. For example, Punjab, there's many different tribes that are joined up to say the Sikhs are extorting us with taxes at the moment. And it's important not to conflate Sikh religion with the Sikh Empire. The Sikh Empire at the time had landowners in those areas who were new Sikh overlords. They extorted the hell out of the systems. So these families went from paying a quarter of their taxes to like 3/4 taxes, which is extortionate. So when the British said, well, we want to take over this area and we'll institute back the old system, they didn't need any encouragement, they jumped straight at it. When they then said, we'll give you more money for longer term employment to go into different countries to fight. We're not going to tell you who we're fighting, mind you. It's the Ottomans or anybody else. But they recruited them. So they voluntarily joined. And they were so valiant. The records of some of their valiance fighting against the Italians and many others at the time, it's incredible. So many of them didn't come back. And with respect to some of the British recruiters, and this is why I don't like painting all of them with the same brush, some of them felt the plight of the men that were never coming back. So they would write about these guys and would say, these men are fighting for a country that's only colonized them, for a language they don't really speak, for a religion that's not theirs.
But that's almost academic. That's academic. That's within the books of manuscripts, and that's not popular, well-known culture.
No,
I'm just using that as an example because I know that there was something recently. I can't remember what the film was called. I don't know, it was like maybe Dunkirk or something like that, and there was like a Sikh guy in there.
Oh the one
Sikh guy, and I think there was a bit of a kick-off. I think the guy's name was it Lawrence Fox or something. He had a bit of a kick. He was like, well, even now, like going back to your PC thing, it's like,
they've only stuck him in because
they just stuck him in because of the token. And people were like, no, actually, there's quite a few of them that fought.
Our people, and I say as Asians collectively, en masse joined. There's no doubt about it. Yes, there were resistance. There was a member of one of my tribes that actually turned against the British. There was a Red Fort trial where there was 3 of them. Shahnawaz Khan, Sehgal was another one. I think, I can't remember the other chap's name, which I should remember actually because it's quite monumental. It was known as the Red Fort trial, if you ever want to read about it. And they joined what was called the Indian National Army. They came back and gave a different narrative to people saying, you do realise they're using us as fodder over there.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
they're sending us in the front lines while they're standing at the back just to get the first hit of the enemy. So there was turbulence within that.
And we wouldn't have been the only country, as in, it wouldn't have been just the Asians. I mean, there would have been a lot of people from
the drafted in
Africa and whatever else. But yeah, going back to your point, I think we've kind of moved away from that. So coming here, it was very much about, okay, so that was one of the reasons.
So they came with that prestige.
They came with that, yeah.
Which is my point, that they didn't come to a country ravaged by war. They came to a country of utter prestige, that exclusivity.
Great Britain.
In what decade are you talking?
So it actually begins even before the establishment of India-Pakistan, because we had a lot of the Gunner Spitfire, a lot of people don't realise. The actual building of the aircraft in the Midlands it was practically a good chunk of those were Asians in the Midlands, were in part of those factories, were putting their parts together. And culturally, they had a work ethic which was very forward and progressive for Europe at that time, which is work nights. Electricity was abound, so you could work nights, the lights are on. And they didn't mind working Sundays. I mean, within reason, because even the factories weren't necessarily all open. But it's war, it's going to be open all the time. So they came in that respect. When the country was established, the country's very poor at this moment. It's a newly established country. So they said, you guys stay here. We'll send our youngest, strongest lads over to England to make some money and come back one day. They came here. Things changed. They realised it's not quite what we thought. We're now going to have to bunk up with potentially 5 to 10 guys inside one room. You know, switch between the shifts, the mattresses. We all heard the stories of how
you're talking here 30s.
We're talking potentially from 30s all the way up to the 70s, where the biggest push between 60s and 70s happened, up to 72. There was a huge push. We were talking from the tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands suddenly. Now, within that time when they came, this is purely economical. They didn't come here because they wanted to fight Nazis. And one of my reasons for them actually going to fight Nazis, they were just paid to do what they did, and they were just soldiers. But the people that came for the money side of things, this was open to everybody. So you're no longer talking about disciplined soldiers from families that have got a certain standard in their mind for how they would live. Otherwise, they're not prepared to fully let go. Because bear in mind, some of these guys were the British when they were fighting the Ottomans, by the way. And there's stories on the Turkish side of where this happened. You've got everybody coming into the country now. There's no such war thing. Everything's gone. But as it came, they established themselves financially in very meagre, hard ways. They eventually they didn't marry locally, funny enough, which sociologically speaking isn't normal. Whichever area you go to, you tend to marry locally. Well, they thought we're going back someday, so they brought their wives over. They eventually realised we can't all stay in the same place.
That's a really interesting point about the marriage, actually, because I was just thinking about how-wise.
Then again, how is a guy who only speaks Urdu going to go out on a dating scene where, you know, you're going to be meeting people of different cultures?
Bear in mind,
a lot of people did, as you said, But
bear in mind, there is a narrative at play around them which is continued to this day. Look at it from the British perspective for 1 second. Learning English is not that hard. How many of us have relatives who come into this country, or people we know, that picked up English fairly workably? Quite often when people are looking for relationships, it's not quite what's said, it's how it's said. People have managed to find a way to cohabit, whichever way we look at it. I think from a British perspective, there was a huge counter movement at one stage, even in the papers, which was very xenophobic. When we look at nurses, for example, they weren't very happy that their nurses were treating people. For example, in Wales, there's a huge BME community there at the time in the docks that was suddenly marrying local Welsh women further on inside the UK, other areas. There was a very protectionist angle. We're not angry that these women are finding partners or marital, you know, they're getting married and giving them, you know, Izzah or anything, because they've taken our women.
And that's a fascinating point.
It's continued to this day into grooming. Everyone knows Shamima Begum's name. But who knows the name of the white groomer from a European country who essentially groomed a 15-year-old girl and married her and brought her into a funny country? When I say funny country, there's a war. This is a war zone. It's not a holiday. He's shown her a utopia. Not many. How many people are willing to do the math and do the research and find how many of the EDL that were protesting grooming, how many of them have gone down for grooming? Who's willing to see how many groomers who are white, how many paedophiles in this country are white, how many of them do we see marches for? We don't. We tend to see it because young Pakistani males are grooming. I am nowhere near defending them, and I can't criticise them enough, because at the end of the day, we have to clean our house. And I find that that's a symptom of what we were talking about. When we came with an intention of economy, which was an innocent enough then at the time, once we established roots here, we didn't quite transition in what we should have done religiously. In terms of ethics. We went around the ethnic road instead of the ethic road. We were very ethnic based in terms of, we brought wives from back home, we set up ethnic communities. Some of our Bangladeshi brothers ended up finding different masjids. Some of the other Muslims from different countries, often, they didn't find that their natural home as a mosque isn't necessarily being catered for by Urdu speaking imam. So we were very ethnic centric, and I think that was down to the kind of men that we had that came over at that time. And bearing in mind, these people went from a community that had 90%, approximate 90% literacy in Punjab under the Mughals at the time, to near way below that by the time the British had left.
But let me bring it to, let's say, the 80s or the 90s. So, like, my mum immigrated from Pakistan to here. Both my parents did. But so the guys that I've grown up with went to Carsfield School, predominantly Asian. Those are the types of people that we're seeing now standing on a corner, selling drugs, antisocial behaviour, knife crime, etc., etc. Majority of those people's parents are illiterate. Father's is either a taxi driver and mum's a stay-at-home wife.
Yeah.
So I definitely appreciate where you're coming from for the earlier generations, but I don't know if this is a mute body only type issue, or whether it's just what's going on here in this instance, where people's parents are the ones that migrated. Now the kids are being born in this country, and we're seeing what we're seeing, the increase in prison population.
You hit the nail on the head really early on. The mother in our tradition has historically been the vizier of the family, the one that runs the house, everything from the finances, how things are running, ensuring the educative aspects of everything. The husband can be within the current system that's set up, goes out, earns, supports everything from here to even our origin countries. The problem is when we had mothers that aren't particularly educated, well, we've got young children who aren't just educated, but are a lot, we call theirs now, but actually in English we say a lot more faster thinking than the mothers. I remember when we were in Castlefield, Creswick, we used to come across issues where there was mothers that had countless notes sent through on the books, the diaries, to say, your kid's causing problems, we need to talk every week. Until parents' union and the mothers were saying with translators, we had no idea you went to speak to us. Well, I don't read English. So we did try certain things with them, like, do you know what the traffic light is? Red, green. Well, if you see green, your child's doing well. If you see it written in red, that means you need to take this to someone to find out what's being said.
Yeah.
To try and counter some of those things. But the other thing is that a lot of these kids know how to, it's the age-old thing, they know how to manipulate parents.
Yeah.
So traditionally in our villages, for example, it's community spirit like they used to have in the UK in villages. The entire village is your father, the whole village is your mother.
It takes a village to raise a child.
So if they were seen somewhere, the word was going to get back. You were going to. I remember I was at a bus stop when I was going on my way to school as a teenager, and one of my mates was spitting on the floor. And there's an old lady stood by him, old English lady. She clipped him by the ear, not hard, just like that. So how dare you? That's poor manners. And he felt so ashamed. Honest to God, for the next 5 years I was with him, he never did it in front of me ever again. But you would never see that today. Never see that today. When you've got people who've been brought out of that system into a lone house where the neighbours are just, hi, hello, quickly close the door, it's inside your four walls. It's not the open veranda where everyone's hearing what's going on in your house. Partaking, it's a bit of gossip, but they generally aid the reputation of that house, because the village reputation and the town reputation. We don't have that here. The other thing is a lot of the behaviour of these children is bringing fruits home that I've seen from my experience not all parents are averse to. I'm not going to blame all parents, but some of the parents I've seen have not been averse to seeing their child go out on Friday, Saturday nights to study in a local library at 1 o'clock in the morning, coming home red-eyed because they've been studying all night, because they're working towards an education, right? They didn't get through in their education, it's because the system's racist, right? They're bringing home money because they're out working, because they're at this new sales thing, they're out there, entrepreneurial stuff. The boys aren't lying, they're just not telling them the full truth. By the time the boys are far gone and me and my colleagues are now at their door, things have gone too far. Now is a biffy thing, which is an honour thing. Reputation thing is a better word actually than honour. How are you going to look in front of all the relatives and all the other local neighbours that your son, who you thought was doing all right, is driving a flash car?
But everyone knows.
Everyone knows.
Everyone knows, and this is why I don't understand this reputation thing.
So
I can't. And
everyone does know. And let's talk about the fact that even people within the community know that this house here is a drug dealer's house.
Yeah.
He's got 4 or 5 fat whips parked outside. I I'm working my ass off 9 to 5, working 2 jobs,
Yeah.
and I'm driving around in crappy Nissan Micra. Yeah. But if everybody knows, then why hasn't that person been pulled up on it?
Now, we got to be careful. What kind of pull-up are we talking? Are we talking self-policing concept of communication? Or are we talking the old Pakistani system of, let's go sort him out, bro?
Both of those.
Now, I'll give you an example. Whenever it was Ramadan Kareem here in Wickham, when I used to work here, and I loved my time. All my policing career, this was the best place that I loved working.
Yeah, that's
I loved it. To this day, I have some of the most fondest memories here. We weren't thinking, alhamdulillah, a spiritual world. We were thinking, from not just a police officer view, I managed to get a lot of brothers together, sisters together, to think, how can we do crime diversion? I forget prevention, that's all we used to do, diversion, with the group that we've got. We had to stop these kids being antisocial behaviour, a nightmare. And in those days, there were members of the council that could say some horrendous stuff about the community and get away with it that they probably wouldn't be able to get away with now. But when we'd approached some of these parents, the community had 2 ideas. Let's give them something positive to go to. And then there was the convincing uncles that would be out there saying, right, young man, jump in the car with me. We're going to take you to that project or you're going home. There's a bit of there was no force used. It was more of out of shame you've been caught. And they were people appointed by the local masjid as well. Youth workers were doing it. The days where people used to say,
I'm not sure we give the local masjid that much credit.
No. When I say local masjid, I mean goers rather than executive. I just made that clarification. But then also, there was a connotation there also politically for the fact that there's a group of people coming together for worship and the kids would slip out. So there was a reputational angle with them. They would give the khutbah for to say, please don't bring your kids. They're not standing here while you're doing the tarawih. Now the issue for us was at that time, we went, within those 4 or 5 years, it moved from very early on strong support to, I remember towards the end, we managed to get the kids to a point where, and those were some hardcore months where you're talking very late into the evening, it was antisocial issues, the neighbourhood teams weren't working so they couldn't patrol. There were parents that would get wound up, how could you shout at my kid? And these are other members of the community that would pull them up. We as a people have transformed from village mentality of the positive ends, that we're as a collective responsibility, to that's my kid, you don't talk to my kid like that. So there's a very isolationist transition that's come in, and that's not been singularly exclusive to the Asian community either. You have a lot of white community people, English people. I get on, some of the best people I meet to talk with sometimes is the elderly English community in this country. They often lament the same things that our community laments. We used to pull up kids that we got pulled up. We pull up young kids. You can't do that today. And quite often, vociferously, it's the parents. I keep in touch with my old tutor from my school, from my secondary school, bless her. She was amazing. She was like a mother to me. But my God, the woman had awe. If she looked at you, and she was Argentinian, and she had like, we used to joke, she had a Spanish fury about her. If she turned, if you were not suddenly wetting yourself, you were gonna have a cardiac arrest. And she's never hit anybody. Towards the end of her career, even she lamented, you will get kids that will try to attack you.
That's a sad state of affairs, really.
And that's between the last 25 years, that change. That's happened. That's within a generation, effectively.
I was going to say, and I think from my point of view, having, I don't know of a better way to put it, but maybe I'll use the police analogy of walk the street, Bobby on the beat, kind of hit the roads type stuff around, especially around those kind of challenges. You know, I ran a project, and again, this is probably going back a good 15 plus years now, where we opened up a local youth club, and there's challenges. And I think this is the thing, is where's the balance? And I think there are people who will rightly still say, and I mean, I definitely had conversations with people who said at the time, you're now offering them a place to go instead of the masjid. So then they're going to go there.
Yeah.
So, and I understand, I can appreciate that argument.
They're not going to the masjid anyway, to be honest.
But that's the point, is, and then there's the opposite side of the argument, is they're not even going to go to the masjid. They're leaving. They are walking the streets, and they are then antisocial behaviour. We had, and again, what I found interesting was that they sometimes used to go egg the Gurdwara down the road. which was always a bit of a...
That was confusing for me. It was offensive to the analogy that considering that one of the first founders of the masjids locally, for was hosting local Pakistani Kashmiri communities, was one of the founders of the Gurdwara. He was a Sikh gentleman. But these kids wouldn't know that, mind you.
And they're not interested. But the point is actually... But I think my point is my questions is actually that delinquent juvenile type behaviour inevitably lead to something else, and then there would be more challenges, and then we would get this, going back to my point earlier, is actually there's an increase in the prison population of...
So that behaviour is a phase. A lot of people will go through it and become absolutely fine. Some won't. And if we look statistically, we are one of the biggest, when I said we, generally as Asians, we are the biggest ethnic minority community in this country. As Pakistanis, and I include the Kashmiri side in there because that's the closest identification rather than the Indian side at the moment, at least in terms of culture and community. Within that side, we are one of the biggest. We are the biggest diaspora of Pakistanis outside of Pakistanis here in the UK. I would come as probably one of the biggest numbers in the UK. Birmingham primarily has, as far as I'm aware, the largest. But the problem that we have is, and it's not just it's not just a phase thing. There's a lot of really good work going into communities to say there's educational opportunities, there are cross-curricular opportunities and encouragements, and we will have kids that are that way inclined who will come. What we don't have is a consistency within the households, and I think that's partly ignorance, and I think that's partly poor aspirations in the parents, where and I say we because I was part of the sort of soul-searching aspect of the community to try and get people to care more about the kids rather than criminalise them, break the criminalisation sort of cycle. I think even I was responsible for the thing that we missed a little bit of a trick with the parents. So we took the message to the kids but missed out probably the biggest message should have been the parents. For example, going back to the masjid point, the Ottomans had a saying, the day you don't hear the kids playing around in the mosque anymore, you know what happens. They won't come. Our Pakistanis tend to be very prim and proper. We don't want kids shouting. We don't even want their presence to be acknowledged. Very conservative. We think it's discipline. It's not discipline. Discipline is very different. Those kids are playing. They know not to swear. There's your discipline.
Yeah.
You get me? They're not stealing anything. They're here. That's discipline. Are they being children as per their fitrah? Yes. So the Ottomans, bear in mind, they had an incredible ulama system at the time, which was completely responsible for that end. Our communities didn't. We lost a lot of that. So our mosque essentially didn't have the infrastructure built in for children from an early age. Yes, they came in to learn Arabic, but not learn Arabic.
Get solid ones instead of reading. But that's, I think, one of my friends is, I mentioned the story before, he used to go to read, and he was so averse to opening the Quran in front of his teacher, even before he's reading it. He's got his hands up in a defensive position. And I pop around to the mosque I've never seen him there. And I don't think, outside Ramadan, even inside Ramadan, I don't think I've ever seen that brother inside the masjid, only on the streets I've seen.
Now, how much of that comes into the other issue? How much of that is his own responsibility because now he's reached adulthood? How much of that is now his own responsibility to think, okay, ultimately, this is a code of ethics, this is a religious system, it's a faith system.
Are we saying that the kids... Right, and this is where, again, like for me, and again, we were just talking about this before the podcast actually, was that I'm so, I understand that, and I get it, but how much of this is kids have been infected, they've got, what is it, PTSD? From going to the masjid as a young child, and they know, and I've heard those stories many times where people would say, I know brothers who said, I would literally, throw the mushaf across the hall, knowing that this is what's going to give me, because it's the cognitive challenges around that, and the association of opening that, getting that wrong, and getting a beat down. But again, how much of it is? I mean, our children did they really get that much of a beating that they got PTSD, and they're now saying, I cannot walk into the masjid.
If I was to tell you some of the stuff that I've seen,
listen, I know, and again, and like I said, it's not as if, and I'm sure it's been the same, wherever it was that you grew up, if you're allowed to say. But
I can still feel my bumps. Yeah, but this comes down to another point as well. Okay, they've represented Arabic lessons.
But sorry, before you go, can I just finish that point though? Actually, how much of it is now that we are now adults?
Yeah.
We have an understanding. We're able to now draw a line, I think, under some of those challenges and difficulties. And how much now are we able to say, okay, I've got to, and again, for want of a better phrase, maybe, just take a deep breath and say, okay, I've got to sort this out. I've now got to take that responsibility and take that step forward myself. How much of it is that? And how much of it is that actually some of those guys are just, well, this is just not going to happen, man.
See, I think this comes down to there's a physical manifestation of this, which is how much of this is the Muslim Brotherhood thought mentality, and I don't mean the political group, I mean some of the philosophy behind it, which is no one's coming to fix us, we have to be our fix. And then you got the opposing view, which is this is a divine faith from a divine source, right? Is that divine force and source going to find its way to bring you in? Because that's my iman. I don't have the kind of cold, almost there were certain communist philosophies like Ali Shariati, Hassan al-Banna used to have, where there was not solely that way, but some Marxist thoughts within it of the group, the people, community mind, they have got to make this change. I don't buy that so much as I buy the fact that there are certain experiences one will have in his life or her life where you are touched by something innately in here that brings you back to your senses in a way. When I say senses, you realise what's important. And this is where our community is right now with its identity. See, Pakistan as a word never existed before 1947. Here's a joke, actually, even for my extreme Indians friends online who put up loads of comments from the RSS and the Modi government that were paid to put in lots of things in comment sections. Pakistan came one day earlier than India, so technically when they say, well, your own country's only started in 1947, it's still one day before India. This is British India before that. Now, as an entity, did Pakistan get conceptualized in 1947? When the country came about, first and only country to have ever come about, mind you, based without violence. Partition was the violence, not the establishment. By a court case, peaceful means, had a proper logical argument in court, created a country. Or was it conceptualized in 1857 in what the English called the Indian Mutiny, what we call the first battle of freedom, the battle for independence? Or was it conceptualized when Mughal Babur decided to break all of his alcoholic bottles and make a promise to himself that he will be a Ghazi to reclaim his ancestral title, which is Northern India, the Delhi Sultanate. And as a Ghazi, he will establish justice in the way that Allah Ta'ala had envisioned it for his people. Or was it conceptualized when Shahabuddin Ghori came in to support Raja Gharib Nawaz against Ajmer Sharif's Raja at the time? Or was it back when Mahmud Ghazni raided India multiple times? He was an amazing Turkic hero for us. He, funny enough, felt himself to be a Ghayanid. Sasanian, by the way, didn't acknowledge himself as a Turk. When did it come? And the conception for that has never quite, our country hasn't quite had that conversation yet. So,
or our people. Our country, as in Pakistan, hasn't had that conversation.
Pakistan's had lots of conversations and they've had lots of opposing views. They've never had consensus on this. So, for example, you have someone like Imran Khan originally who was very secular-minded.
But can I just say, so I understand that and I appreciate that. My challenge is, and do you know, it reminds me of something that after my little... so I worked in Wembley. I don't know if I told you about this, but I worked in the pupil referral unit in Wembley. So inner city London, pupil referral unit, and you can imagine, I'm obviously massive on camera, I'm sure, but I'm not the tallest guy. And some of those guys were 6 foot plus, and it was incredibly intimidating, incredibly difficult, incredibly hard work. And I remember speaking to that, and I'll try and bring the point around. So I remember speaking to... And again, they were predominantly Afro-Caribbean kids. I remember speaking to a couple of those boys about the Windrush and the Windrush Generation, which again, is receiving quite a lot of media attention now. But at the time, I was like, look, this is what happened because, and Afro-Caribbean had a very similar story in terms of the world wars, in terms of the support for the British Empire, and then Great Britain then saying, hey, come over here, it's amazing, it's wonderful, come and help us rebuild this, come and help build this, it's essentially motherland, this wonderful country that's colonized you and whatever else.
And they came over as citizens, mind you, as a British Empire citizen.
Yes, exactly.
So they come over
slightly different. Yes.
Yeah.
But those boys were just like, bro, what are you even talking about? Why do I care? So my point now to you is, why does a 15-year-old kid who's born, there's so much that's happened post 9/11. They were born post 9/11. To me, that's mad. It's just like
they won't even remember the after.
But this is what I'm saying to you. So now so they don't have that. They don't have that baggage.
So
why is it important for them to?
So at the moment, we've got the two opposing thoughts of spiritual, physical, material, generally anyway. Within the identity side, that's completely material. It makes no difference. One of the biggest waliullahi in Pakistan, Shahbaz Qaland, the Uzbekistani heritage, didn't even look Asian in our conception. Yet it's one of the biggest places. He literally epitomizes Pakistan to everyone in India who looks across. There's another flip to this. When a person comes to their senses, they generally, and from where I work, I tend to see a lot of it happening. There's a lot of soul searching in custody when you get people who are left in a room on their own thinking, you get the normal people who've done something wrong. I say normal people as in people like us who can make a mistake for whatever reason, someone's made an allegation, you're in there.
Yeah.
And you get a person who's thinking, or they recluse and resign themselves completely to a delusion of material identity. She was wrong to have reported me to the police because I hit her to chastise her. They recluse into a self kind of righteous delusion. And it's interesting, I remember Sheikh Hamza Yousaf was talking about delusions. There was some research done into it. Everyone has a delusion. Everyone has a delusion that helps them get by. Some more rational than others. The bigger the group, the bigger the delusion. So nationalism is one, secularism is one, liberalism is another, the far right is another one. And they have the paranoias. But essentially fear is at the core of it. And when a person is faced with a fear that I was wrong, oh my God, how wrong was I? What the hell have I done? That makes a person connect with something. Now we can argue vulnerability at that stage. For example, if you're in a prison, you're in a soul-searching place and you suddenly see a guy who's giving you a completely rational repentance route and can bring you into an extremist group, whether it's a far-right group or some of our more hardline brothers in prisons at the moment. I say brothers because there's nothing of their ideology that I can look at. And I don't call it religious, I call that aspect ideology because the Quran and the Sunnah is still the same between us all. Their interpretations are a bit different. Because I have seen guys who don't read namaz at all. I've seen white converts. If you ask them, have you read namaz? They put their heads down. Alhamdulillah, there's a lot of shame there. But completely tattooed up and they're still massively addicted to drugs and they're still out there committing criminality. But there's something that had hit them that made them try and come to their senses to think, what shall I do? This is not the right way. Now for that, the identity thing is what used to see people through that hard time. So when you come and recenter yourself, if the spiritual has always been there as part of the identity, you will generally find your way. Now, as far as the masjid system, we have a very distorted masjid system before, up until recent times. Today's masjids are very different to previous ones. You did your after-school quick class, learning a language you don't really know, picking up a book that you don't know a single thing it's teaching. You just learn how to read Salah and you're on. You didn't really learn Islam. Now when Islam is a lot more mainstream, there's fantastic classes going on in the various different schools within it and aspects of it. And there's a better alignment going on. But the recentering from identity, where as a community is still informing the individual, it's still informing our youngsters. For example, we are in a position now in this society where it's normalized for young lads to either think taxis or selling drugs generally is a possibility in our community. And the reason I say that is because it's prevalent, it's there, right? One of the first things I came to talk about in this community was about 15 years ago. There was a sergeant who approached me to come here talk to boys in Green Street at the time. It was about the way they were just approaching local girls. It was so rude and out of order. And there was nothing noble about the way they were approaching these girls. it was just downright rude, and it was filthy, for want of a better word. It was filthy. Now he just wanted them to say, boys, if you want to, I'm not going to stop you doing what you want to do behind your rest of your community's back. But you can't start, touching up girls and standing at bus stops and doing stupid stuff. Today, it's a different connotation that's now led on from that, which we've seen in the papers and whatnot in the media. But our primary focus today shouldn't be that these things are a possibility. We need a counter-narrative to these that's far more powerful than it is at the moment. So we haven't quite mainstreamed the fact that, and I'm not going to say the typical being a doctor, being an engineer. We have some of the most biggest entrepreneurs in this country, predominantly Asian backgrounds, who have got highly successful businesses, highly successful organizations. But instead of thinking graft your way there, and then staying in those localities to show this is what you can achieve. What we're seeing in our community is no one is going out promoting drugs. No one is going out, and I say within reason, no one's actually going out there on the Friday call to buy the local mosque saying, guys, drugs are great. Take taxis, don't declare all your earnings, you're good. Thinking that there will never be a comeback on your pay being haram in some way. There was never any explanation of that. Money laundering has been made to be an easy thing. But our community lost its sense of identity, and why are we here? Because none of our elders used to get involved in this kind of thing. It was very exceptional for them to have got involved in criminality. And why was that? Because very early on, they were so centered in that raw sense of what the hell are we in because of poverty.
So are you saying that this comes from some sort of identity crisis that young lads are having? Because from my point of view, as I'm growing up, I just thought I was brown. So when I was young, I was at primary school, I'm brown, okay, cool. Went to secondary school, life hit me like a sack of bricks.
Yeah.
And I realised, okay, hang on a second, I'm actually a minority here. Cool. Went through that, went through uni, you see the whole liberal lifestyle, London lifestyle. Cool. Been there, done that. Then you come out into a working world. And I think it was only really when I started work that you start kind of asking yourself, look, who am I? What am I? The first word that comes to mind is Muslim. Okay, cool. I'm a Muslim. But then where do I belong? Where do I fit in society on this level? All my friends that have grown up around me, that used to live around me, went to primary school with me, same class, they were drug dealers. Is that where I was supposed to go? Or is it the fact that now I'm here and my identity has now become as some sort of working professional? I'm at work. I'm still a Muslim at work. You go to pray salat, you sometimes get, the dodgy eye of a customer comes in and what's this guy doing? But the other one is getting your foot caught in the sink when you're trying to do with the work for university. And I struggled with that initially because you come into a liberal world where people attack you for who you are because of a beard that you grow. You're automatically an oppressor. Your women are oppressed because they wear a hijab. So then you find yourself battling against those types of arguments.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it does chip away at your identity a short bit. So
if you don't mind me asking, what did you find comfort in which area did you say you resign yourself to being a Muslim?
Yeah.
But what does that mean to you though?
So to me, it means to be at peace with my Lord.
Yeah.
La ilaha illallah. If I die tomorrow, I'm going to be in a state where I'm happy to stand before my Lord.
Yeah.
But it took a lot of soul searching to get there, because first things first is you have this identity of a Pakistani culture, because that's what you're called from the outside. You're always, as you're growing up, you're Pakistani.
What do they call you when you go to Pakistan?
Vilayati.
There you go. So which means British.
And then another funny one is, whenever you speak to someone who's actually from Pakistan, because I'm not from Pakistan, you see, I'm from Mirpur. So even then, they're like, you're not Pakistan, you're Mirpuri. You come back here and, It's less overt now, but I have been called a Paki.
Yeah. Have you ever spoken to somebody from your own community in front of white colleagues and have been asked to speak in English?
I actually haven't.
You're pretty lucky.
Yeah, I think that it's getting a bit more commonplace. I work in Oxford, which is quite liberal in that sense.
Oxford is a lot more cosmopolitan, very progressive area in comparison.
So in that sense, I count myself lucky. But I do know
private sector generally has a lot more progress than some of the I mean, certainly more than policing, way more. I remember remarking to my commander when we had a working training day at a local O2 building. And I must have seen probably 30% of the entire office workforce that was going through it. Amazing, cool place, looked amazing. Even I wanted to work there. Honestly, it was beautiful. 20 to 30% of all the people who passed me were white. The rest were from every other country you could think of. And it was so inspiring, just seeing that, because of where I primarily have worked. I remarked to my commander and said, our station is a time warp, because you walk into that station, our station is not representative of the area it's in, because white people are the minority in Slough. But you go into that station, you would not know it. You would not know it. And that doesn't take away from the characters there. They've got some fantastic... Slough's actually known as a very friendly station, mind you, within our police force.
Okay.
But I'm talking about the visual representation. Now, what you articulated there, quite interestingly, was who am I, where am I from, where am I now? But you went such a long way around to articulate the most important bit is, where am I going? Because you've resigned yourself to this. Okay, what does it mean though? Well, I'm going to resign myself to the fact I'm a Muslim. Okay, what does that mean though? Where are you going? As in,
are you comfortable within your own skin to be caught with your foot in the sink?
Can I just go back a little bit though? One of the things, and I think it's really interesting, you mentioned it earlier as well, about Green Street. Actually, when I worked at Green Street at the youth club, there was a guy from Liverpool. I don't know why. I genuinely can't even remember why. I don't know his name, but he was here as a youth worker, and he was there just basically asking questions. And, you know, there were some of those other things that you talked about earlier, but he actually asked the question: "Are these guys? So these guys are Muslim, right? What does that mean?"
Yeah.
Because in his mind, he's just like, right, these Muslims, they pray, they fast, and they do these things, and they're nice, and they're respectful, and they believe in God. And these people, these kids, these boys, they're not doing that at all. Like, that's not any... I think he just had that thing, and I think the lead youth worker at the time kind of said, look, they're fiercely Muslim, as they are fiercely Pakistani.
Yeah.
And that really got, and for me, I was like, okay, but what does that even mean? Now I can look back and go, what does fiercely Muslim mean? It's the identity. I'm Muslim, I'm Pakistani, therefore means, and I think, I mean, this, it's a bit of a tangent again, but I think this goes back to so many other things that we have. Like, we have to be super, whatever it is. We have to be anti-establishment. We've got to be fully anti-establishment.
Defensive against the right, and then you've got to be defensive against the left. You've got to be...
No, I mean, again, for me, my point is going back maybe years is you've got to be fully anti-establishment. You've got to hate particular people. You've got to hate particular religious groups, and you've got to support
when
other
we say people, we mean specifically, we're not talking about other minorities, we're talking a group of people who are materially inclined to criminality, a completely different identity, which is a completely self-serving material. We're not talking capitalism as a system and all this other stuff. We're talking specifically criminal, sort of something damaging to society.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about, and those people would not have been necessarily, like you mentioned, it's like, you know, are they there? Like, okay, so I'm Muslim, that means that, you know, I've been created for a purpose, and I now have to have this existence on earth where I'm now having to try and figure out what my purpose in life is. Okay, so what is my purpose? You know, they're not having those soul-searching type questions, but they're like, I'm Muslim.
I'm Muslim, but I don't know what it means to be a Muslim, and I don't know where I'm going to end up.
No, but they do know what it means. They have their own version of what it means to be Muslim. Does that make sense?
Just like you, there's certain experiences we've seen that have shaped our view towards, for example, foreign policy. You mentioned foreign policy to our generation. We're talking Iraq War, we're talking the Afghan War, 9/11, 7/7.
And for me personally, I can sort of go back, but I can pre 9/11. I didn't know. I was Muslim. I was fiercely Muslim. I was Pakistani, right?
Yeah.
So I grew up. I was Muslim. I fasted, and I had to go to the mosque on a Friday sometimes when I wasn't at school. Those kind of things. But when 9/11 hit, I was like,
oh damn.
whoa!
Yeah,
Hold on, these are Muslim as well. Is that
me?
and that, for me, that led me to kind of some soul searching and some questions. It took me a long time, and still trying to find that.
Funnily enough, I was in year 3 when September 11th happened.
Year 3, huh?
Year 3, and
And
the funny thing is, I still remember 9/11 because the next day when we went to school, in English, I had to write a report of what happened and the significance of it. I don't remember the report, but I just remember I had to write about it. And I thought, the guys that did this look like me. And like James Baldwin, again, I mention him because I'm reading a lot of his works at the moment. He says, when I was growing up, I wanted to be that cowboy, against the Indians.
Yeah.
I wanted to be, the hero, but I
wanted to be the cowboy. He was the masculine, virile hero, and I wanted to chase the Indians.
Yeah.
Until I realized
I am the Indian.
I am the Indian. Now, that is quite interesting when it comes to our community in that respect, because we were, there was a sudden them and us overnight. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Suddenly you had to kind of sort of justify that you're not of that type, and there was huge assumptions. I mean, even the media were playing random videos of different things,
and that, that language plays a massive part of it. So then all of a sudden it's just like, okay, we've got to try and, oh my god, how are we going to? So there's the extremist Muslims and the moderate Muslims. It's like,
and even the books of Islam,
there's challenges. Yeah,
I'll be very honest, they were poorly translated. In the English they used was wrong. There was a lot of things that were used as examples that were poorly translated. Take the typical example of Iman. What do you think it means in English?
Faith.
Belief.
It's actually closer to integrity.
Okay.
Iman al-Banda, he's a man of Iman. You could say he's a man of faith because he's keeping his integrity for a reason. But it's such a rich word. So depending on the crowd you're talking to, the integrity of that individual, and some of the language that had come out at that time was so defensive from our community, because let's face it, no one was used to suddenly being defensive about being Muslim. So defensive people do what defensive people do. They go on the attack. So suddenly we were fiercely Muslim. We all were. But we don't agree with terrorism. Well, look what you're doing in our country. There was a prevalent narrative at the time of whataboutism, which the Russians were very, very adept at, where every time they said, look what you're doing, they were like, well, what about what you're doing? We suddenly adopted a lot of those. And our community has had a problem with that since, because I remember reading this comment about the Hagia Sophia last week, and someone had started putting under the comments of what appeared to be an English gentleman had written, it belongs to the Turks. But for me, that's it. I respect it. I know I've been allowed into mosques. I don't see any difference here. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I'm commenting about it because I'm moved by it. I'm glad that people are in a sacred space. Leave them to it. And I have to call him an idiot because he was an idiot. Clearly, someone who appeared to be from South Asia background, and he was Muslim, and he turned around and he goes, well, what about the Barbary Masjid? Look, what about them? Are you going to speak about that? And you're like, dude, appreciate. Where is he taking the conversation? Where have you took it? It was a natural, I wouldn't call it even defensiveness, it was a certain venomousness that is prevalent in our people within certain quarters in their defensiveness that isn't actually Islamic.
But the one thing is that people who feel like they've been subjugated for so long, when that anger rises up, you're not always going to have level-headed people to be able to express that. Like, again, James Baldwin was called the great black hope of the white grandfather, because you've got your street guys who are like, yo, I'm gonna burn this down in the name of BLM, or you've got the writer, which is that James Baldwin. They're both coming from the same place, but how it works itself out are two completely different results.
We had different schools of thought from that era. We had the very let's work together, the peaceful Martin Luther King, who was a little bit, you got aspects of Gandhi in there, where it's like, we will not commit criminality, but we will be civil, but we will be disobedient. You got the Malcolm X angle, which is we will fight to get what we deserve. And then you had the narrative. For example, James Baldwin, for his era, he was incredibly intellectual. He actually had a lot of love for Turkey. He had a lot of respite from racist America to go in the intelligentsia within the Turkish side, because they were very secular around then. They were very welcoming of him and the black plight. He wasn't as huge there as these giants were. And interesting, in the documentary recently about I Am Not Your Negro.
Great movie, by the way, for anyone who hasn't watched it, do watch it.
He makes a really interesting point how he was affected by each of these different giants at that time seeking equal rights. Our journey in England has been different. So we hear about Pakistans. Who hasn't heard about Pakistans mentioned by elders? They used to literally, there was a TV documentary once where there were a group of Muslims and non-Muslims in a house. They said, let's keep them together, see what happens. And there was a retired policeman who was like, yeah, I used to see it. Sometimes I'd let it happen. He wasn't bothered by it, and the girl started to cry. She was like, no, that's my dad. My dad had that happen to him as well. These are very emotive topics. Well, you've got the Martin Luther King side where we've got politicians who are now also Muslim. We've got a British Bake Off winner. We have a mayor of London, despite what the far right tried to keep saying about him. We may not all live in London. I've always found that fascinating. But at the same time, despite all of this happening at the same time, you've also got a different side of our community, which is trying to establish itself in a bit of a different way. They're saying, actually, we won't accept this anymore. And these were our elders. We don't accept Pakistani anymore. And at that time, there were all these groups were still there. Very educated Asian backgrounds. Not so educated, but hardworking, but still ethical. These were people still of integrity. They decided, they grew up with the black community, and they started beating back every white group that was looking for them. They'd go out looking for them. They were like, we're going to beat them back up. These Pakistans didn't stop because of any natural, ethical soul searching that happened within races to say, let's stop it happening. Our elders went out there and gave them a good hiding back. The police were not coping with it. The police weren't dealing with it. The police often were involved in it. And that is on proof from witnesses who were there, who still narrate these tragic stories to this day. And imagine, these are our dads, these are our grandfathers, our uncles, who were probably the most peaceful men, hardworking men, who got headaches for multiple tens of relatives in their very poor countries to send money to get them married, educated, respected at least. And they had those pressures. And then, some racist comes across and beats them up for nothing. So they fought. They had that Malcolm X mentality of fighting for it. Our communities had a very different journey in this country than the Americans have had.
Definitely, yeah.
But it's had a similar structure in ways.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels to be drawn, because history is such an important topic. What do they say? The one who doesn't study history is doomed to repeat it. So if you look at the writings, or if you look at the lives and the stories that these great men in America, they lived, you draw parallels to our experience here as first or second gen Muslims. Someone once put it to me that the black people are only 3 or 4 generations ahead of our plight. I think in the UK we're a lot luckier compared to America. But it doesn't mean that these issues don't exist here.
Well, it's interesting you say that. What's the one TV program that's resonated the most with our community in recent times? And I mean in the last 3-4 years max.
So is it Ertugrul?
Yeah. Without a shadow of a doubt. Now that's in a language surprisingly very similar to our own, Pakistani, funnily enough, but very similar to it.
Can I just
But
can I just point for the record again that I've still not watched a single episode?
Oh my God!
And I have absolutely no intention whatsoever.
It is very, very long. I'll be honest. I know it's there for.
No, you'll forget how long it is. You'll be like, well, this is not long enough. It's interesting how that has emoted more with our people in terms of their identity.
Yeah.
You look at Pakistan, there's breaking records there.
Yeah.
I've still got to ask why. Why? What is it that, we're still living in this, it's almost this sort of fantasy of, not even fantasy, because, I'm allegedly it's based on sort of, real events and whatever, and or there's some kind of description there, but it's still based on this this yearning and this pride for what happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's like, and my thing is still like, okay, where are we at now? Like, how is
that relevant today?
That relevant now? Because we're still talking about. I still don't think we've really answered that question of that thing about identity. Because I think it's well, we're not going to answer it because it's such a difficult thing. But also we've still not answered that sort of. We've still not really. I think that whole thing about those people that have been brought up, grown up in our system, that are now not going to the masjid for whatever reason. It's like, why? What is it about this that what are the challenges now, or what are the barriers that are there that can be removed?
What Muslim superhero have you ever seen?
Do I need to see a Muslim superhero though?
Well, you see a white superhero constantly.
Yeah, but do I need to see a Muslim superhero?
Do you know you're missing something until you've seen it? Is the better question. Did you know that you were missing it until you realised you didn't see it?
I've seen these comics where they have like the Muslim superhero and she's wearing a hijab, and I'm just like,
oh no, that's just
exactly. I'm a bit cringe about that.
That's just commercial. That's the Wakanda of Muslims. But that's a South Asian Wakanda story.
Yeah. Do white kids who see Superman go,
I'm inspired by that to be
I'm inspired by Superman because Superman's white and he looks like me?
It's actually more subconscious than that, because what it is as Brother Yousaf said, is that white is intrinsically linked to being the hero, the breadwinner, the masculine.
I appreciate that. I 100% understand that.
As white as they come. He's fairly blonde hair as well.
Yeah, but
the crack with it is, I find, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that I don't think identity is what we were. I think identity is what we are.
Yeah.
And where we're going, as in what we're doing. It's doing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And what that show does is it tells you what to do with that drink being poured into your glass, multiple different drinks being poured into the glasses of what we are. We're a jug. We're always going to be a jug, filled with different experiences.
Right.
This tells us what that drink is meant to do. There's a thirst there, yes, within our people to see us in a positive way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've got to argue the Turks do it far better than the Arabs have managed to do it in a lot of their drama series. Some have got better, but they're still way
out of there. Series, except the ones that came before.
Yeah. But then in fairness, that was a docudrama rather than a drama serial.
Yeah.
The thing with this show is it literally embodies areas of Islamic values in action that you don't normally see. Like, for example, where we are fiercely Muslim, we are fiercely Pakistani, but we've actually I see it completely differently. So I think we're fiercely Muslim when challenged for those few conversations, and on Fridays, perhaps some of the appointed prayers. That's it. The rest of the time, some of the uncles are doing questionable stuff. It's unfair because I see a different side of our community than most people ever get to see.
You've got to be careful, this is going to go out.
Yeah. I've seen probably the worst of the worst, and I see the different side to the respectable faces too. So what that show, for example, does is it tells you what are you meant to be doing with what's being imbibed in you, pushed in you. Like, there's a sense of adal on that show, which is just incredible. Adala is like the
are people doing it though? That's my question. And again, look, I'm almost at the point now. And again, I'm literally at the point now where we had Sheikh Shams has mentioned it. He said as amazing it's been. We had Sheikh Dawood Walid a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about this.
Yeah.
And he talked about the whole thing about Murabbis and how that helped instill. I know Muhammad Jalan, you mentioned before, he talks about this a lot. Well, I'm almost at the point now where I'm just going to be so stubborn and pig-headed that I'm not going to watch it for the sake of just being that one person. Just being that
you're going to text me one day saying, bro, I'm so sorry. You will. There's so many
I'm sure, but you know what? I don't know.
Wait till you see it. If the first time he launches doesn't catch you.
I'm sure that there's loads and loads of positives and there's benefits to it, which is why so many people do talk about it, which is why so many people have been, and it's why it's so positive. But these boys that are now criminal, that are going to the prisons, and how is it supporting them and their identity, and how is it helping And should it do? And because going back to that whole thing you said about superheroes, like,
So,
should it do? Like, is it that's not its place?
I'll tell you an interesting.
Maybe that's
Give you an interesting incident that happened with me. There was a lad arrested for quite an embarrassing offence. And while he stood there and I'm talking to him, and I do use my culture with anybody who is behaving in an arrogant way that is not quite understanding the gravity of what they're in for. Because that's my job. I have to make them understand.
Build rapport, etc., etc.
Yeah, but also there's got to be areas of they've got to understand the gravity of what they've done, because this will add to either reforming them or they're actually going to go back out there and do it again. This is part of our reform side of things. Whilst this guy was stood there, having done what he's done, his phone went off, and it was the ringtone for the Didnt. And the officer that brought him watched the show as well, and he looked straight at me. Halfway through, he was absolutely bending. When that came on, I looked and I was like, you watched that show and you did this. He put his head down. He was so ashamed.
It's instilling that sense of...
That's where it comes in.
Yeah.
And that's where it comes in. When he felt it. Now, what that show is not going to make you a good Muslim. I'll tell you that now. What it is going to do is make you reflect on the deeper parts of our deen in a practical form that you're seeing. And Muhammad Ghulam put it quite well. Everything's propaganda. Everything you see is propaganda.
Yes.
Well, for a change, I'd rather see ethical propaganda in something that's actually relative to what we should be biased towards. Ethics, justice, compassion, generosity, masculinity even.
I'd rather put my propaganda forward, is essentially.
Yeah, but this is propaganda that we say as a society. I don't think many people disagree with us, even in the West, for some of this stuff, like we say toxic masculinity. Well, by that very nature, there has to be by default a positive masculinity there. And what that quite means, like on the show, hitting women, it's seen as very, very low base. Respecting women, listening to them, respectfully disagreeing as well, but you maintain your status in a way. Same with the women. That's exhibited and demonstrated. However, some of these kids probably never seen any of this. So what they're seeing effectively is what the tribe is about, what their ethos is about. Yes, that show probably has more fallen characters and base people and bad characters than good characters. It reflects on a person's life. You're going to get more hardships than good ships. I mean, look at the Prophet ﷺ's life. And it's very easy for us, mind you, to say that, and I'm not always pro saying stuff like that, because we're not all prophets, we're not all sent similar crises. Some of us are very, very rich, live in absolute, luxury lives compared to relatives in different poorer countries. But still, we have our own form of crises. We have our own things that we see. What does ethics mean? Do we apply that where it really matters? Do we apply it to our finances, our food, our relationships, our friendships?
So this is a point that I've been considering a lot recently, is that we read a book, Brave New World, and I don't know if you've ever read that book. It talks about soma. So soma is some sort of drug that people take when they're met with trouble, and then it helps them ease themselves. And if they're ever, to conform to society, take this pill, everything will be okay. Don't worry about anything.
Government sanctioned drug.
Yeah. So it can be anything in the sense that you can consider it, weed, cocaine, alcohol, I don't know,
it's like
social media, whatever. So it's a metaphor for something or other. But recently, more and more, I see some drug dealers coming into the mosque, sit there, listen to the sheikh for an hour, listen to a nice story, feel good in their heart, go home, next day, back to the same craft. And in some sense, deen has become a sort of a soma, that you go in, you think, okay, I've done my bit. I've listened to the sheikh, I've done my bit, I've got this feel-good feeling, and go home, and that's it.
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Sorry?
Opium for the masses.
Yeah.
Maybe a different take on the...
a different take on it. But
again, people have confused, this is a fantastic point you mentioned, our people have confused worship for repentance. It's a component of it, but it's not repentance.
Yeah.
Repentance is making good the loss you've done to another. And that includes yourself, society, your deen, your family, your clan reputation. That was the traditional view of our communities was always. And actually, our community as a whole is a clan, a Muslim clan. We have idiots, I still believe they are our responsibility, and we should claim them. I don't like doing the kafir on people to say they're not Muslim. Look at them, ISIS are Muslim, they're Khawarij, they don't even know their deen, they've got idiots kind of Muslim. The bar's quite low. I remember Muhammad Abu Hanifa, I did actually say, what takes you out of Islam is what brought you in. It's the kalma. Now, within that concept, it's very easy for us to say that's not our problem, but it is. We've commoditized the deen to say that these acts of worship are repentance. That is your tawbah. We say to Allah Ta'ala, I'm really sorry. Actual tawbah, if you want to learn the concept, was from the Murabbis, it was from the Sufis, for example, where they were doing extreme. The Sahaba, Hazrat Bilal once had Hazrat Abu Dhar Ghafari, he was from the Ghafari tribe. He was still very proud man, very ascetic, very humble. But he said something once about the race of Hazrat Bilal, which was not to his own glory or to his. And the Prophet was very upset by that. He heard the Prophet was so upset, he went to him and he literally said, put your foot over my head, Bilal. And he was like, hang on, you were saying this stuff to me before. Why are you saying? No, I'm not going to walk away from here until you put your foot on my head. So no other person, and plus my own ego, will understand. Don't ever say this again. To make myself repent for what I've done. We don't have that.
Yeah.
The word penitentiary, ironically, comes from penitence in America, where they haven't got it in those places. So originally, they were reform systems. They were there with the good intentions. Of course, populace is extended. There was the baggage, obviously, from slavery and all these other things. But the will was there as a place of penitence. We've lost that within the justice system today. I'm telling you now, there are guys I've incarcerated who've come right back out and still continue. Do I feel good when I've got a victim justice by sending someone down? No. One of the reasons I'm a police officer is it satisfies my need for justice, to do the right thing, to help people. I'm happy to forego money doing entrepreneurship and any other businesses just for this. But a part of me has a higher standard. It's not just about sending a guy in or a girl in. It's about making right to the victims, society. But if this dude is going to come back out having learned how not to have done it the wrong way,
get caught again.
So really, is that a penitentiary then? Or is it actually a boarding school, for want of a better term, to learn how to get it better at the taxpayer's expense? And this kind of goes back to the number of our kids that are currently in the system. Are they going in there and learning how not to do this again? Are their families appropriately supporting them? Do you know what support means in my book? If your kid's done something wrong, bring them. Bring them right to the court and say they've done something wrong, they will fix it. Don't just defend them. Sometimes defense means fixing the mistake they've done. But no, there'll be some parents who absolutely know, they've seen the proof of what their child has done. They're still, it boggles the mind. It's the love of a parent, which is why it's one of the biggest tests we have is wealth and children. Imagine hitting you that your child is about to go down that masoom, sinless child that you remember as a in your hands when they're born. You know, you could have a Zainab, which is the best of a father, the term as a Zainab. You could have a beautiful protector, a little Nasra. You could have a Zain of a son who's, the best of all worshippers. You could have a little Ali, a valiant young man who you love. You could have a Noor of a daughter. But when they do something wrong, are you going to chastise them? Are you willing to commit yourself to the ethics of what you believe as a religion? In here, in your senses, where your fitra, your center, is worth fixing that child for? Is it fixing to get them away from the longest prison sentence? That's protection. That's not defense. Or is it saying, I am saving you hereafter, and your conscience? There's a victim out there because of you. One of the most popular questions I used to get asked in recruitment whenever I talk about policing, specifically from our community, and our people are very loyal to each other, traditionally, was, would you arrest your own brother? The most common hands-down question I always get asked. And I've always said to them, if my brother, knowing he is my brother, has gone out and wronged a victim, if he has hurt somebody, if he has committed, in Billah, if he goes and commits burglary, if he goes and commits rape, now I ask you the question, if my brother had done that to, God forbid, someone in your family, would you want me to arrest him? I would. Without doubt I would, because my brother has wronged. and he shouldn't have done that. And I know it's very black and white, but our deen is very black and white in places. There's a lot of grey area that is there to help you reform and come back to the centre again. But wrong is still wrong. Yes, areas can be suspended. If my brother's gone and stole something because he was hungry, he's on the street. Even our criminal justice system isn't, there's officer discretion. We, as a justice system in this country, I argue sometimes we're very Islamic in ways that the EDL will probably be, whipping themselves into a frenzy if they realised how Islamic this country system is. Ijtihad is at the centre of quite a lot of it. The House of Commons does that all the time. Ijma. So Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, this country's common law. A lot of it comes from biblical sources. The ijma between government, communities. We are letting off a lot more young people for crimes to not let them be criminalised, to give them further chances. Alhamdulillah, I stopped counting after 100 when I was in Cressix, of the amount of kids I managed to not allow to be criminalised, but ensured they repented for what they did societally through RJ, restorative justice, which actually existed in this country well over 1,000 years ago. Tribes used to go to other villages, dragged there to say, you will make good the wrong that you've done and admit what you've done. Then they are going to ask you to do something to make good. And sometimes they would forgive, sometimes they say, you owe us this much. Similar to the Islamic systems. Now, where it comes to our communities, protectionist things comes from also when we look at schools. It starts in the beginning. The relative that tells your child off, suddenly we don't talk to them. But the other side of it is the teachers that chastise our children. We need to be a little less defensive, but also see things from a slightly different perspective, have those standards that we hold our children to account more than we hold others to account. And I think some of the problems that we're seeing at the moment in transition is happening to other communities as well. Because we're seeing a massive sense of self-centric sort of changes in society, very extreme defensiveness of the personal anxieties people are having. We're having them as Muslims. Surprisingly, white Englishmen are having it too. They're feeling a lot of their culture is eroding. They are becoming global. They don't want to be global. They want to be local. Some of the Brexit sort of side of things, it was very difficult for me to understand how the dynamics of it wasn't racist in some respects, and some of it was utterly just protectionist anxiety. Some of it was, well, actually, there's another entity controlling us. We never liked it when our ancestors were controlled in colonial sort of aspects, but we weren't alive in those periods. Our parents were. They seem to be a lot more at ease with it than we are. Now, is that because they were conditioned in it? Well, not necessarily. They experienced freedom in ways we haven't even. They migrated to a different country. And yet they seem to be grounded, critically, mind you, in 60s, 70s values, where people in the villages, I mean, my relatives in Pakistan, almost none of my cousins are married within the family now. But we were all expected originally to marry within the family. So the self-centric sort of things have come into conflict between a lot of our kids and their parents. There's drifts. Similarly with the culture of kids in this country, when they're fed a narrative, these Muslims are coming into your country doing X, Y, Z. They're taking your women and doing this. They're doing this to your, their head of their London mayor is some sort of, implant of extremists. If you're fed that narrative and you're listening to echo chambers, similar to how other cultures, some people in our own have been hearing, is it any surprise there's an anxiety and then people are becoming more self-centric, selfish in a way? The problem with our people is we did have something to refer back to ground us. How connected were our elders to have kept us on there in comparison to other stages in history where they did go to different cultures, they did marry outside, they continued their efforts, they were very successfully integrated into those countries still. Like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad has released a book, it's amazing, travel home essays. The man is a prodigy, he just raised the IQ just listening to him, but he made some fantastic points. What virtue is it wearing a cotton thobe in the middle of a European country where it's freezing or it's raining? What is the logic? That's not the order of our people. I mean, let's face it, we're Asians, we're not Arabs. Our ancestors didn't even wear thobes. Genuinely, when they were as Muslim as they came. I was researching my family, and I found even within the family tree there were so many Ghazis. They were as Muslim as they came.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier, actually, about commodity. It becomes a commodity.
Do you think it's a commodity, or more that people are embarrassed of their own culture to think that they want to then...
But that's the accusation from, for example, our next door neighbours in India. You guys all think you're Arabs. Now you think you're all Turks. I'm averse to the second argument, mind you, because we have a lot of Turkic influence in our culture.
Yeah.
Our language comes from there. The word Urdu is a Turkic word, meaning it comes from the word Urdu, which means army. So many words in your Patari come from there. The Mubarak also, that's the Turkish word for Mubarak to you. Well, Mubarak also, we say Mubarak also. Well, that's a to be word, whereas we say Mubarak.
Yeah.
Right? There's certain crossovers that undeniably they follow Turkic culture in India. A lot of Hindi words are Turkic. The red dresses for their weddings are Turkic. The turban, the dagger that the Rajputs wear, the long swords, the way they dress, it's all Turkic. Because look at the pictures of Ram, Sita and Arjun, they weren't wearing those clothes.
Yeah.
You go to Rajasthan, they are uber Hindu. They are uber Hindu. But the culture, they will not like to admit, comes from Turkic culture. So there's a cultural dissonance amongst in India today, which is leading even them to be very Hindu-centric today. Now, for me, somebody who's born in this country, I was born in Wickham, actually, incidentally, funny enough, but I see so much virtue and forward, progressive, almost prophetic understanding in Muhammad Ali Jinnah's vision of why Pakistan was created, because there was a foresight of the communal violence that was divide and rule that took place in India post-1857, where Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims were united behind a common concept. Remove the colonial, reinstall the Timurid Mughal emperor. Because he was a figurehead for everybody. Even the Marathas couldn't be rulers of India. They had to be the protection extorters of the Mughal emperor. He's still emperor. We're just his protectors for a while. That happened until Ahmad Shah Abdali came. Don't watch the Hindu movie about the Bollywood movie concept of him. The Hindu books about him, mind you, are better than the Bollywood movie about him. But a lot of this in today's modern thought is coming back full circle. I find it's coming back full circle. So if you look at, for example, right now, communalism was an issue back then. Is it an issue now? Look what's happening in India. I'm not saying we're that much better in Pakistan, mind you, but when I say we, I mean as a collective of Pakistanis. But you don't see what's happening there. Our Prime Minister is busy opening up roadways to people from the neighbouring faith of the Sikhs to come in and freely do their worship. But we're seeing communal stuff there. We're seeing the protectionist kind of stop taking our women rhetoric that was over 100 years ago in this country. It's going back full circle with the grooming scandals happening. We're seeing different aspects of our religion, which was very staunchly political undertones to the religion that were around the Wahhabi phase. And the school of Dewan was heavily influenced by that. We had the Bareilly school, which was very, very anti that. But we've forgotten the second understandable, accepted general consensus of the Mujaddid, and the next one in our continent was Bir Mehr Ali Shah, rahimahullah. He came the most closest to the era that Pakistan was created, where essentially we started seeing more of our elders, period. Why isn't he quoted amongst our people and recognised in the way that Ahmed Raza Khan is? And we even see a lot of our sort of schools now becoming quite venomous. The biggest argument I was seeing online wasn't what are drug dealing idiots doing. Why is grooming an issue with some of our idiots? Actually, they're hiding it from the mainstream. Why, and how are they doing that? How can we hold our own communities to account? They're not arguing that. They're arguing what some random Maulvi in Pakistan said on TV. And should we do that for them before doing?
I think that's a big point of contention that I always end up raising with the scholars of today is
relevance.
That you're on the mimbers. You're not talking about the guy outside your masjid selling, drugs, but you're talking.
Or the uncle laundering money.
Yeah, or the uncle laundering money, or the bootlegger who's donating money to the masjid. But you're talking about, I don't know, the same topic you've spoken about for the 40th time.
They've got the top 10 list, haven't they?
Yeah.
Women, Yahudi conspiracy. Because if you, depending on which mosque you go to, the other sect, Shia come up quite a bit. The fitna of women, definitely, that's got to come in somewhere. There's big points for that. But it is changing. But generally, there's a top 10 list they have, but it's down to the people we bring in.
I think
because we've imported a lot rather than going all the time.
It's so strange to me that it just doesn't get spoken about, and the pessimist within me gets quite angry, and I think, look, why are you so afraid to talk about these things? Why do they not cross your mind?
I think there are.
Or are you just disconnected from it, and you're again in this sort of a bubble or an echo chamber?
But who's directing them?
I would say that from my experiences, And I think there's a lot online now as well with some imams who are talking about these issues, who are bringing these issues to the fore.
Yeah.
I mean, there's possibly an argument for, has the horse bolted and now we're closing, the gate kind of thing? And is there already a challenge? But also, is there so going back, I do think there are some, and quite a few imams that do talk about some of these challenges.
But
they
imams,
have,
activists,
but are they?
They're talking about.
Yeah.
Is that a role of an imam?
Yes, and again, that's a
whole.
certainly another podcast that we can maybe have about whether an imam is an activist, whether an imam is an imam leads the prayer. Are they community leaders? Are they the ones that should be doing this? Are they the ones who should be self-policing or organising that?
But flip it. If the role of an imam is to be an activist, well, is a role of our Muslim activist, should that be grounded within Islam then? Because that's the next big point. How much are we allying? And this isn't a point of debate for us, but is how far do we go in solidarity with groups that show solidarity with us without compromising aspects of our Islamic values?
For anyone that's not sure, we definitely had that conversation with Sheikh Dawood Walid, who has a book called Towards Sacred Activism, which certainly was actually... our activism must absolutely 100% be grounded in Islam. Yeah. Because otherwise, what's the point?
You lose your sincerity, I think.
And we lose credibility for what we're doing and why we're doing it as well. And I think that, lots and lots of challenges there. But so if anyone's interested, listen to that one again. And also get the book.
Yeah.
Cool. Let me just come back to last point. I think we're just going to start wrapping it up now. One of the things that I think both of you kind of almost mentioned really in terms of certainly our elders, elder generation who came, maybe in the 60s, 70s, talked about, they had that work ethic. And now actually some of the young people, and actually I found it really interesting when you talked about the whole thing about Islam and that thing about seeking repentance, because that's work. It's not, astaghfirullah, I'm done. And it could be as easy as that if there is absolute intensity and integrity and intention behind that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive whatever. But it's hard work, and it's hard work to then make sure you're not doing that again. So it's just, and I find that an interesting concept of, do we actually now have that? Does a new generation or younger generation have that work ethic?
I think with the younger generation,
I'm looking to you because you are the younger generation.
I look at myself and I think I'm too far gone. I'm looking at the kids that go to your Cub Scouts, and I'm looking at them, and I think we shouldn't ever put up a glass ceiling for them in terms of saying, do they have the work ethic or not? I think that it is about the people that are raising these new generations, and for those people to have a grounding and an understanding of how I need to bring my child up, that when that child sees wrong, that the child can recognize it, and if they can't, they can rectify it. And that any hardships, so our parents, we speak about them and we speak about, the where we are as a community now, but we can't ever pay them back enough for the sacrifices that they made to come here. So, for example, my mum, she was a single mother. When the Paki bashing was going on, just next door, it was a bunch of Pakistanis, skinheads that broke into a house and beat up a teenage boy. And then my mum was hiding in the bathroom with two toddlers. And this was in the 80s.
Yeah.
These are the sacrifices, and these are the conditions that our parents faced. Not only the journey to come from Pakistan to get here, but also the experience that they had while they were here. We can't thank them enough for that. But we have to acknowledge that we are suffering from some societal ills because of,
affluence.
Whatever. Yeah.
We've become lazy with affluence.
Yeah. But what we need to now do is to take on that baton from them and be able to pass it to our children who will go on and do bigger and better things. That's the way I see it. So I don't think we should ever question their work ethic, but to empower them to be the best that they can be, to teach them about the world, what it really is. Our parents educated us for a reason, and now we need to use that education to push those children further.
You know, it was an interesting mention in Ibn Khaldun's book, The Muqaddimah. There was a really good point he made about how empires try to rise to become, they begin from the bottom and it's all work ethic. And he had a theory of how empires are established. The guys and girls getting to the top are hungry because they've seen hardship and they've gone through hardship and they never switch off. They're the establishers, they're establishment-minded. The ones born in the affluence who've not quite experienced what they've seen.
The second gen,
third and fourth gen, in fact, fall probably a little bit even further. That's what the decline starts from the first gen. Because the minute they're gone, the next gen starts the decline.
They've done that work to get to the top.
Yes.
So I've heard this concept before.
And where our people have had affluence come in remarkable ways because of that work ethic, community work ethic. I mean, community still goes on. That system of everybody contributing together. And there was a purpose for that, mind you, because the same people who were working hard every month to make ends meet, to get that paid, but also you found out who needs that money earlier, who's got that need in our community. That's a selfless thought, it's not a selfish thought. They would do that, whereas somebody who's a bit well off would be like, I don't mind you saving the money for me at the end. I'll get the last number out of the pot. But this person needs the earlier number. The ones that went through all that to cut money, their own stomachs to save, to give us clothes, food, and relatives back home, clothes, food. I had relatives who wore Adidas while I wore, Primark equivalents in the 80s. That I hated and I was ashamed of at the time. I'm at peace with it now.
Woolworths.
Well, yeah, Woolworths every weekend. But we tend to forget, and you're quite right to raise this, we do tend to forget, we don't just hold them to account for a lot of stuff, but imagine the mental health impact on somebody with that survival mindset, isolated in a house, not even a veranda with excluded for people, in an isolated community, in an isolated neighborhood, with a husband who's out, you don't even speak the language, you don't know what 10p is and £10 is. You can't. All you see is these faces on the notes that you don't know what they mean, but it's a precious piece of paper. You probably never touched that paper from where they're from, and they are expected to raise these pristine children with the best work ethics, excellent education. In my sort of work earlier on, I did see the husbands that would be very upset with the women that wouldn't be focusing on the children enough, and those poor women had no idea how to do any of this, and they have rings run around them by young kids who are sharper to pick up that baton and run faster. There's a really interesting concept, which is it's an elder saying, which I'm poorly translating from Bhatari culture, which is, up until you're baligh, it's my fault how you are. After you're baligh, it's your fault how you are. Which essentially means that I have to put in every value I can in you. If I don't and you turn out bad, it's on me, because you never saw any good. If you happen to turn out good, that's you being amazing. If I put everything into you and you still turn out bad, that's on you. I did everything I physically could. I went through the struggles. I mean, one of the reasons we have in Islam respect for the elders isn't because your mother bore you for 9 months and your dad gave you 10 quid here and there. Our elders, and we all will, start going through mental health challenges as we get older, because we can be tired of this BS in life, families, politics, identity, all this stuff. We just want some peace. We'll be very short with ourselves. And when that happens, when we do speak curtly to our children or their children, we don't want to be answered back. We want to be appreciated with the gratitude you just rightfully mentioned there. And that's why Allah Ta'ala doesn't like it when we speak harshly to them. But in the same way, that work ethic, I don't think we can, in our generation of affluence, with the aspirations we currently have, I don't think we can imbibe it strong enough. If we knew how powerful our presence is in this country, the fact that Sir Paul Condon, back in, arguably almost 20 years ago, the Met Commissioner once said, we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. Not very well chosen words given what happened 5 years later in his capital. But we're sitting on a time bomb of young Asian men. Turn the flip side to that. Look how positive we can affect this country in amazing positive ways. Policing is, for example, a very reactionary organisation. So is government. When things go wrong, people lament, cause problems, raise complaints. Shumaim Begum, I mentioned earlier, she's a fantastic example. Absolutely stand against everything she's got to stand for where she went. My problem with her situation and the right-wing take on her situation isn't that this poor girl who went, there is that separate thing. My major problem is a two-tier citizenship in this country, where there's an individual who, if you're white and you've done something wrong somewhere, you're not being made stateless because you're indigenously from here. We're born here too. Why is it that a girl who's never visited in a way to Bangladesh for citizenship, she's not born there, why is her ancestry being considered as a place for her to go? And the government at one stage had pandered to that. And that's very dangerous. That is for us a challenge that we need to be facing today, and not just as Muslims, but as Asians, as a collective. And this is where things like BLM tie into experiences of our community, because there are aspects where we have seen racism. You won't remember this, but there was a Bollywood actress that once came to a Big Brother house, and there was horrendous racism she went through. And the Asian community in this country, as well as the black community, kicked up a huge stink about it, rightfully so, because they recognised everything she went through, we went through at school. Talk your own language. What are you doing? Everyone's sniggering at the little things you're doing. They're otherising you in every way.
I was going to say, I mean, there's so much more to that.
I know.
There's so much more to that. But then these are the sort of examples that Priti Patel used as well recently when she said, "Well, I was called a pack in school."
Well, this is interesting because we have to record. This is a very uncomfortable truth for us. She is Asian. I know it's hard for a lot of us to admit sometimes because she's not taking the responsibility for it. That's where our problem is.
It's not even responsibility. I don't know if it's just responsibility. She's not playing. She's not singing from our hymn sheet or most of our hymn sheet. She's not looking out for her own. Is how we want to.
But that's what I mean. Is that her responsibility? Yeah. Does that come with a responsibility for us? I think it does. Yeah. And that's why a lot of people technically hold to account. Sajid Javid was exactly the same, and he's from Mirpur, by the way. Funny enough, you're owning that one, with respect. But the thing is, it was so interesting. He always otherised his Pakistani culture, generally, until Trump visited.
Wasn't he?
He wouldn't even let him on the same table.
But until he had his video, his PM video.
Yes.
I didn't remember seeing that, but that was very much really.
But he made a lot of promises, even in the leadership bit. I mean, it was never going to work.
But yeah, anyway, let's not delve too far into that. But let's actually finish, inshallah, on a positive, because I think one of the positives that we can really take is actually it's on us now, and I think that's a very, very important thing for us to remind ourselves. I think we've spoken a lot about the elders. We've spoken a lot about history, the challenges of history, and how some of those things are possibly affecting us now. But actually, what we can really do and try to understand now is that we are fully aware of what the challenges are. We are fully aware of what the problems are. And I would like to say, just on some of the topics that we mentioned about, some of us who used to go to the masjid and, had some challenges and difficulties going to the masjid. That's why organisations like Karima existed. That's why they started up, so that we can have that influence on teaching the children, not just how to read a book in Arabic, but how to teach Islam, how to teach Quran, how to recite, how to understand the book as well. And there's so much more as well. So inshallah, the ball's in our court now, essentially. So we're now, when you talked about Ibn Khaldun's sort of thing about, they would work hard until they got to the top, and then the next generation would be a little bit softer, the third generation would be a little bit softer. But actually, this is now our opportunity to really take all of those, the different mix, the different challenges, the different opportunities we have, and inshallah, benefit, ourselves and our communities and the wider community around us as well, inshallah.
I think and you're absolutely right, we've come to start because of we own the narrative now. We do. We're journalists, we're police officers, we're lawyers, we're politicians, we're teachers, we're every aspect you can think of. We're representing Britain in so many ways.
We're podcasters.
Well, famous ones, inshallah. And what we now need to do is think in the next phase. We need to have ethical, genuinely sincere, authentic change agents. If you ask me, from a policing background, I'd love to see more of that element within policing. There's areas that I've challenged within policing. Had I not been there, it wouldn't have been that way. There's areas I've been able to articulate things to our force in a way that I couldn't have done outside. I could protest outside there with a card every single day. The wheel does not turn in some organisations as fast as we need to. But if we're going to call 999, do you not want somebody coming down who's going to understand why something is as bad as it feels to you? I can tell you there are still white officers who don't get what it is that we feel when we're otherised, or aspects of racism. It's still, general mainstream society still calls it a race card. We need to show not just the victimhood side of things, but we need to start not just educating, but showing and doing. I think we need to have move forward, figure out where a plan is. Our aspiration can't be in front of us. It's got to be miles ahead. And we need to start developing a program towards it now. We need to start understanding that, for example, appreciating something is more than the sum of its parts. What I mean by that is an example. Ali Azarbegovich, once really beautifully wrote in his book, Islam Between East and West. There's a really interesting concept he mentioned about art and what it means to be human and the soul. Like a beautiful piece of art is not the sum of the ink that's used. It's what we put together and the product it created to create that beautiful thing that everyone can appreciate. If you go to Alhambra today, even the Spanish Inquisition, as venomous and as it's evil and anti-Islamic as it was, to the point that only 200 years ago, they were still keeping front doors open to make sure there was no one pretending to be Christian and were actually Muslim on the Fridays. They were still doing that, only up to 200 years ago. They couldn't break down that building. The artwork was stunning to them because it was beautiful. That's not the sum of the wood, the concrete, the sandstone. That's not the sum of it. It's what they did with it and what they achieved. We have to go from the reasons that our parents are coming to this country. We now need to change our presence in this country. We have to create the Alhambras now. And that takes the strong, very unsophisticated bases to build the beautiful palace on top. And yes, there'll be sell-out front doors that'll be standing there as police officers. As far as our community is concerned, there'll be the stock fillers who will have their parts to play. But the beautiful art comes from the rare, the gold that will be coming out of that. Because if we don't create the basics, we can't create the overall beauty of our community. And it is. We are hardworking. I think our generation is far more ethical in many ways than our previous generation was, which was very sort of selfish towards the clan, the tribe, the family, rather than the children. I think that's one thing that's something that's changed in us. We are the clan, we're the people. Even our neighbours and friends are the clan. Our town is a clan. We can build on that. There's areas that I look at is light years ahead of places like Reading, for example, where I'm from. You could look at areas like Birmingham, which has got a lot bigger diaspora of our people. And when you see some of these videos that are very disappointing to see, like the street fights and things that they have, really see things. But there's aspects of real beauty in that town as well, where the quiet corners where they are developing really beautiful areas for our deen. But we need to mainstream it now. We need to not think thobes and long beards for no purpose, but we need to start beautifying ourselves within the culture indigenously in this country.
Definitely,
There's ancient poetry in this country, which is, you would swear, is Sufi poetry from the Middle East in its translation, but it's actually from the Gnostics and the saints in this country's tradition. They may have forgotten what their real past is. We can be the beautifiers of it. But I think, on my ending thing, I would say that I think policing is a fantastic sort of opportunity for people. It's a hard opportunity, but a developing opportunity. And I think it will bring great izzat to our people for us to sort of engage in that side and bring a different aspect to our story in this country's narrative.
Inshallah.
Any final words?
No, our brother Yousaf has put it beautifully. And I wanted to say thank you for coming down and giving us your wonderful insights into everything, and your experience is valuable. I know we do need a lot more Muslim professionals like yourself speaking to people that sat behind the screens, and I think it's wonderful that we're able to put people on this platform.
Inshallah. And then just a reminder, so the platform is lots of other podcasts are available, so karima.org.uk for all activities that are related to Karima. So not just podcasts, but we have a variety of courses, sessions with Sheikh Suleiman, obviously karima.org.uk/podcasts for some of the other podcasts we mentioned earlier. I talked about Sheikh Dawood Walid, really, really interesting regarding sacred activism and the integral thing as well. So inshallah, if people are interested, feel free to go download those, all available on YouTube as well. Share, like, subscribe, all of those kind of good things, and then pass the information on. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.